At first glance, these pictures look as if they came straight out of a wacky Hollywood disaster movie, in which some crazy inventor drives a house around on a giant inflatable boat, protecting it from a flood. And unbelievably, but true, this is exactly how a man saved all his belongings in 2016 from one of the worst natural disasters the US has ever seen. But more on that in a moment. In this video, we will present you not only the incredible story of a man named Randy Wagner, who, despite all the criticism, showed it to all his neighbors, but also wacky stories about groundbreaking constructions that hardly anyone believed would be completed. It's going to be very exciting, so stay tuned, here at Wonderlane. As announced, we'll start with Randy Wagner, and perhaps the most bizarre rescue operation of all time. In order to find out exactly how Wagner saved himself, his family, and above all, his house, we go back to 2016. The setting for this insane story is the small town of Brazoria County, Texas, which was hit by record-breaking and extremely dangerous storms in May 2016. Since such storms regularly cause billions of dollars worth of damage in the US, and quite a few people lose all their belongings in the process, most residents of the affected regions are prepared for such events. This time, word got out a few weeks beforehand that violent storms would soon reach the city and tear down everything that had not been secured beforehand. However, this time, the storms had a special feature. They had been causing massive rainfall and flooding in other regions for days, which not only caused some sewage systems to overflow, but also flooded entire streets, which even caused entire cars and houses to simply be carried away by the water. With these storms now on course for Brazoria County, local authorities immediately began evacuating residents to safety. There was one citizen who resisted these measures, and instead didn't want to sit idly by and watch all of his belongings being destroyed by the waters while he sat far away on dry land. For this reason, Randy Wagner resorted to an extremely unconventional measure, which many people even considered ridiculous: to fight the floods. After hours of research on the internet, he discovered a company called Aquadam, whose product exactly met his requirements. Aquadam sells special rubber hoses on a gigantic scale that fill with water. The more water that flows into the house, the more they inflate, which causes them to become a kind of protective wall up to a certain height. While this product seemed too good to be true, Aquadam was not very well known at the time, so Randy Wagner was not able to get any testimonials on whether these hoses worked well or not. However, since his neighbors were the only ones who had sandbags in front of their houses, Wagner decided to experiment with Aquadam and ordered hoses 76 centimeters high and 137 meters long for $8,300. All the hoses together weighed more than 360 kilos, and although Wagner already had enough to worry about, there was another challenge he had to face. Aquadam could not deliver the hoses on the spur of the moment, so Wagner had to make an impromptu trip to the company's headquarters in Louisiana to pick up the product. This meant a trip of more than 800 kilometers and more than 8 hours of driving, during which Wagner was afraid all the time that the devastating storms would reach the city before he could set up the hoses. If that happened, all his efforts would have been completely wasted, and he would have lost all the items that meant something to him. Due to some incidents, Randy Wagner reached his house just in time when the first rain started. Together with two friends, he now rolled out the hoses and hoped that they would serve their purpose. Meanwhile, according to his own statement, he was watched by a couple of neighbors who really made fun of him and claimed that these measures would never work. Much more, they laughed at the fact that he had not put his personal belongings in a safe place beforehand like everyone else, and was thus doomed. When the local river overflowed its banks sometime later and began flooding Brazoria County piece by piece, all critics were proven wrong. While all the houses, protected only by a few sandbags, were flooded, Wagner and his family sat quietly on his porch and watched the water rush past. Not only did his entire property remain dry as dust, but because all his possessions remained intact, Randy Wagner saved himself over $150,000 in repair costs. By deciding to buy the hoses, Wagner not only showed all his neighbors, but also saved a lot of money. Next, we come to another fierce construction, which also made all critics stop laughing after a while. We're going to the USA again, but this time to the coast of South Carolina. Since this area is known for its exclusive residential location, many wealthy people move there, which leads to the construction of one spectacular villa after another. In between all of these luxury homes, there is one house that is quite different from all the others, a house called the Eye of the Storm. Although it is not directly known who currently lives in this house, there are said to be complaints in the neighborhood that the Eye of the Storm does not look aesthetically pleasing and drags down the overall image of the neighborhood. However, the appearance of the house is no coincidence, as it fulfills a specific function that has regularly proven to be completely crisis-proof for several decades now. The southeast coast of the USA is an absolute risk area when it comes to violent storms, and especially hurricanes. Since warm and cold air currents often meet in the nearby Caribbean, strong hurricanes regularly form, which then set course for the USA and destroy everything that gets in their way. Or almost everything. Because the house, the Eye of the Storm, which was designed by a man named George Paul, has been successfully defending itself against every storm since 1989, and that in a very specific way. The parents of the designer George Paul lost all their belongings in a hurricane in 1989. Paul then wanted to build a house that was equipped to withstand these violent storms, and began to read up on aerodynamics and air behavior. After some time, he came up with the idea of building a house that would use a special architecture to redirect the air currents, and thus not be affected by the high wind speeds. So, he designed a house that not only consisted entirely of round elements on which the wind was deflected, he also conceived a first floor made exclusively of cavities, where the air could enter on one side and leave on the other. To this end, the building materials were almost exclusively steel, which provided additional stability. Although, as mentioned, this design is very controversial, as many neighbors find the house very ugly. In the end, it was always George Paul and the residents of the house who had the last laugh, and survived every natural disaster unscathed. Next, we come to one of the most famous skyscrapers in the world, which many thought could never be built, the Taipei 101 in Taiwan. This tower, at 508 meters, was not the tallest building in the world for a long time, but above all, extremely controversial, as critics considered its construction absolutely unrealistic. Taiwan is, in fact, a small island off the coast of China that is regularly hit by violent earthquakes and typhoons. So, when architects arrived in the early 2000s with the idea of building a tower over 500 meters high in the middle of the capital, Taipei, there was justifiably a lot of criticism of the plans, as the fear of such a gigantic structure collapsing was omnipresent. The architects had a secret plan up their sleeve, with which they silenced all critics. Between the 88th and 92nd floors, i.e. at a height of more than 400 meters, they installed a pendulum that compensates for the fluctuations caused by an earthquake or typhoon by gently moving in the opposite direction. This gold-weighted pendulum weighs an incredible 660 tons and is suspended from 4-arm-thick steel cables. It is also the first of its kind, and has since become a regular tourist attraction within the Taiwan landmark. The pendulum also proved to be extremely effective after the skyscraper was completed, as the building was not damaged or shaken in any of the subsequent earthquakes. So, by an extremely creative architectural measure, the builders of Taipei 101 have shown it to all their critics, and built one of the most spectacular buildings in one of the most dangerous regions in the world. Last but not least, to conclude this video, we briefly come to another crazy safety measure that not only saved a house from damage, but also many lives. For this, we go back to the USA, or more precisely to Florida, because that's exactly where Hurricane Michael raged in 2018, one of the worst hurricanes of all time, causing an incredible $25.5 billion in damage and several deaths. Countless Florida citizens lost the roofs over their heads in this natural disaster, and it took months to clean up some of the damage. However, there was one house that survived the disaster almost unscathed, and this despite the fact that this house, of all things, seems more unstable than all the others at first glance. This house has a special feature that protects it from hurricanes with wind speeds of over 400 kilometers an hour. It is built on stilts that extend more than 12 meters into the ground. Although these stilts are very thin, with a width of just 30 centimeters, they are attached to the rest of the house with so many metal frames that it is almost impossible to detach them from it. In total, over 3,000 of these so-called hurricane clips are installed throughout the house, holding all the boards together. While this method was controversial when the house was built due to its simplicity, in hindsight, it turned out that the simplest methods are often the most effective. Although the house was not entirely undamaged when Hurricane Michael hit, and individual columns were slightly cracked, the unconventional construction method can be considered a success, since it was the only house still standing after the natural disaster. And that's it for our video. As you can see, in the end, it's often the people who are completely convinced of themselves and their plan and know exactly what they're doing despite all the critics who have the last laugh. So please, write us in the comments which construction you found the most awesome. Otherwise, like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to Wonderlane for more exciting videos, and we'll see you next time, here at Wonderlane.